At College under General Lee in 6970 by Reverend S. H. Chester, D.D. Although I was at college the entire last year of General Lee's life, my opportunities of personal contact with him were not very numerous. A few months after the opening of the fall session of 1869, he left Lexington on a health trip to Florida and was gone about 2 months. And during the remainder of the college year, he was very intensely occupied with the plans for enlarging and broadening the scope of the college work, of which his consciousness of increasing physical infirmity led him to try to hasten the accomplishment. I suppose no more complete greenhorn, so far as the ways of town-bred people are concerned, ever came to Washington College. I came from a remote country village in southwest Arkansas, 25 miles from the nearest town of many as 1,000 inhabitants, which town I had visited very few times on account of difficulty of travel in that section. During the Civil War, the highest military officer I had ever seen was one brigadier general, and I had only seen him at a distance. I was naturally very bashful, and I think my first impulse on coming in close touch with a major general even would have been to get away before being observed. As a matter of fact, I remember that while I would have been glad to see General Lee at a distance, I dreaded the ordeal of actually meeting him. But when I did meet him, this is what happened. As I was walking in front of the college chapel with an Arkansas student of the previous year, R.D. Hazlett, now of Staunton, Virginia, I noticed a gray-haired gentleman coming up the steps from the chapel basement. Just as we were passing by the steps, my companion said, "There comes General Lee. Let me introduce you to him," which he did. As I looked at his countenance, instead of feeling my impulse to run, I stepped up to him without any feeling of embarrassment and holding out my hand said, "How do you do, General Lee?" While his countenance expressed all that could be expressed of personal dignity, it was at the same time one of the most benignant countenances I have ever looked upon. It was his custom soon after the opening of each college year to have a reception at his home for the new students of that year, in order to become personally acquainted with them and to learn the names and faces which he had never afterwards forgot. He kept a little pop-eyed colored boy who he used to send around with a list of the names written on a paper to whom he wished to interview in his office on account of any kind of delinquency. This was practically, except very occasionally in aggravated cases, the only manner of discipline resorted to in his administration. It was a very effective one, and no student who ever had that experience ever wanted it repeated, although during the interview frequently no reference to the occasion of it would be mentioned. I received one of these summons only once. I had been sick in bed several days and had not had the opportunity of reporting to the professor my reason for absence from class. When I entered the office, General Lee spoke to me very pleasantly and asked me when I had heard from home and said he hoped my parents were well. I said, "Thank you, General Lee. I hear from them regularly, and they are very well. But before pursuing that subject further, I wish to inform you that I have had a little attack of Arkansas malaria, and as this is the first day I have been out for several days, I have not yet had the opportunity of reporting my reasons for absence from class." He was evidently convinced that my statement was correct, and at once said in reply, "Well, Mr. Chester, that is all right. Good morning." At the introductory reception at his home, he made the greenest of us feel easy and at home, introducing us to Mrs. Lee and the 3 daughters, Mrs. Mary, Agnes, and Mildred. Probably what I now write should not be given any publicity, although in my opinion it applies no discredit to anybody. In those days, the serving of light wines or frappé seasoned with light wine at entertainments was a practically universal feature of Virginia hospitality. At this reception, there was a bowl of sherry wine diluted with water and seasoned with spice and lemons, called sherry Cobbler. The color of the liquid was about the same as that of weak cold tea. Now, before going to college, I had never heard of sherry Cobbler. Neither had I ever seen tea served cold. We had been having cold tea at our boarding house, and the boys spoke of this concoction humorously as cold tea. I thought it was cold tea. Only I thought it was the best cold tea I had ever tasted due to the seasoning of spice and lemons, and I allowed some young ladies who were serving to fill my glass several times. Presently I observed that I was talking incessantly, and that I had no power to stop. The young lady with whom I had gone to the reception was Miss Lizzie Kilpatrick, afterwards Miss Charles Graves of the law school. A very bright and sensible person, as she showed me on this occasion. Finally, I asked her whether she had observed that I could not stop talking. She said she had. I then said, "Well, I know what I'm saying now, but I do not know how long that will be the case. The boys called this cold tea, and I thought it was. But there is something in it that has gone to my head." She suggested that she and I go out and take a promenade in the fresh air, which we did for about a half an hour, by which time I was about back to normal and returned to finish out the evening without further trouble. After General Lee returned from Florida, I saw him occasionally on visits to his home, and met him occasionally on the college grounds, but usually only for a casual greeting. But as was the case with every other student who had any appreciation of greatness and goodness, the influence of his character was with us continually, as a stimulus to what is good and restraint from things of which we knew he would not approve. He used to say that he pleased no emphasis on rules and regulations beyond this, that a student's stay in the institution depend on whether he knew how to conduct himself as a gentleman. When he died, I was selected to represent the Arkansas students on the guard of honor that watched by the body as it lay in state at the college chapel. On account of the immense crowd present, the funeral service was conducted on the lawn by General Pendleton, his former chief of ordnance, and then rector of the Lexington Episcopal Church. I have never heard anything more impressive than his favorite hymn, "How Firm of Foundation," sung by several thousand people, most of them old Confederate soldiers, out in the open air. The three daughters were noble women, each according to her individuality. They were out-of-doors women, fond of long country walks, and I came to know them quite intimately and frequently went with them on these walks. Miss Mary, the oldest, was a very masterful type, not afraid of anything or anybody, devoted to her church and eager in doing good in her own way. On one occasion, walking out alone, she came upon a mountaineer about 3 miles from town, mired in a mud hole with his wagon load of apples and beating his horse unmercifully. She walked up to him and ordered him peremptorily to stop beating the horse and showed him how to get out of the mud hole, which he did under her direction. She then made him give her his name and described where he lived and how to find his cabin, and wrote the directions down on a slip of paper. On this occasion, I missed my one opportunity of a ride on Traveler. She wrote me a note and asked me to take Traveler to go see this man and make him promise to attend a Sunday school our college YMCA had established on House Mountain. I was not well enough to go and sent my classmate D.L. Wilson, afterward pastor in Bristol, Virginia, in my place. The man came to Sunday school regularly, learned to read and write and to wear decent clothes, gave up his whiskey habit, and got to be a decent citizen. Miss Mary used to watch for him on Saturdays when he usually came to town, and always spoke to him and inquired how he was getting on. Some people sometimes criticized her for her disregard of conventionalities, but it took a good woman and a woman of character to do a thing like that. Miss Mildred, the youngest daughter, was her father's favorite, it was always said. She was not beautiful, but had a bright, interesting face and a pleasing personality, and a fine literary taste and culture. I took many long walks with her, and once when she had sprained a foot and could not walk, I went frequently to read with her at home. There was no romance in our relations, but we became genuinely good friends and corresponded for quite a while after I left college. She had fine humor and was free from all piosity, but was genuinely religious like her father. When I was in distress for the loss of a brother near my own age to whom I was much devoted, and of whom I had often spoke to her, and she was at the same time distressed on account of her mother's death, I had a very beautiful letter of condolence from her, which I still have, preserved along with one at the same time from Miss Elizabeth Preston, now Mrs. E.P. Allen, in my memory book at home. I mention these things to show, blue blood aristocracy as of course they were, how truly democratic they also were. What they asked in regard to the young men whom they admitted to their circle socially was whether or not they were of good character and had sufficient intelligence to be pleasantly companionable, and whether they had the manners of gentlemen. On one occasion, when General Caverly Fitz Lee married his second wife, a girl of 18, and brought her to visit at General Lee's in Lexington, I was sent for and asked to see to it that she had enough attention from the college boys to give her a lively time, which I did. Miss Mildred was much sought after by men whose alleged love, she knew, was mingled with respect that stood aloof from the entire point. But somehow, the right men from her standpoint never came along, and she never married, as neither of the other sisters were. Mrs. Lee, when I first knew her, was an invalid, confined to a wheelchair with rheumatism. She was always very cheerful and very motherly towards students who visited the home. She sometimes had me bring her my socks to darn, and once gave me a little sewing bag with needles and thread and buttons for my own mending. I feel now, 50 years afterwards, that I can never be grateful enough for the providence that brought me under the influence of this great and good man in my young manhood, and for the good that came to me from seeing something from the inside of the Lee family life.